bells of the Great September tolled for a wedding, but the sound had in it a strange gravity, as if the brazen throats remembered that in other days they marked burnings and burials as often as they did joy. Smoke from 100 candles layered the light with gold, and pillars white as bone rose into a forest of ribs and vaults where the 7 watched with glass eyes and painted smiles. The small folk pressed the aisles, nobles filled the transepts like embroidery on a funeral cloak, and on the high marble dais the realm's great men composed their faces into masks of reverence while their thoughts crawled elsewhere. To accounts owed and alliances broken, to insult and opportunity, to old wrongs and to blood. Robert Baratheon stood before the mother's altar with the naked truth of him in full view. A mighty breadth of chest under a robe of midnight velvet, shoulders built like the buttresses of a keep, hair already receding though he was not yet 30. A face that people always called handsome until they saw the wear of wine and grief. If his hands shook a little, only Eddard Stark noticed. Ned sat in mail beneath his doublet, the pelt of a white wolf thrown over his black, and his gray eyes lifted to the statues only when he feared meeting the eyes of others. He had seen men die with less spectacle than this. He had buried a promise beneath a cairn of stones where the wind never ceased. The bells could not drown the old words in him, the hushed, the hopeless. Promise me. Cersei Lannister was queen still while she wore the crown, and in the splendor of cloth of gold she might have been cast of the same metal, her beauty a bright weapon made without flaw. She did not tremble. She did not cry. A lioness neither begs nor pleads, and if she bled in the heart, she bled in silence. The High Septon, jeweled and heavy, lifted his voice and intoned of sacrament and sin, of the authority of the gods and the consent of men, of betrothal and bonds. The words went on and on like a winter river grinding ice. Your Grace, the High Septon said at last, the faith is not swift to undo what the faith has sanctified, but it is written that a pre-contract, made before gods and witnesses, is no small word. When a vow stands first in the sight of the 7, subsequent vows must yield. The realm knows you were plighted to Lyanna Stark of Winterfell. That vow was not dissolved by your will. It was dissolved, so we were told, by her death. Robert's head turned. The nave rustled like a field when wind crosses it. We were told, he said, and his voice could have brought down rafters. Lies were told in the fever shadow of war. She lives. There had been whispers, of course. King's Landing fed on them. The city had been inverted by the rumor that a ghost had returned in the flesh. But rumor is a silly bird. It fluttered when the doors in the western wall swung wide and let in a sudden brightness. She came with the light behind her, slight and straight, her black hair a river down her back, eyes like a wolf's beneath the edge of a northern circlet. The flowers she wore at her shoulder were winter roses, pale as frost, their perfume drifting even to the dais. Lyanna Stark walked with the poise of a horsewoman and the unadorned grace that had razored young men's hearts in half long before this day. Cersei's fingers tightened where they rested upon the rail. Jaime stood at her shoulder in white and would have fended the world if his oath had allowed it. But the Kingsguard's vows are iron when they are most cruel. Tywin Lannister, beneath the Lion of Lannister in the North Transept, held himself motionless. His face was stone. Only his eyes moved, small shifts of amber under pale lids, measuring the room like a surveyor's plumb. Lyanna stopped and dipped her head where the light flooded the flagstones. Ned heard a low murmur from behind the statues and caught a flick of spider silk in a shadow. Varys, nesting quiet as always. Littlefinger's soft laugh was half swallowed by the bells. Pycelle drew his beard to his lips. The queen who was not yet queen raised her face to the king, who had once been a boy with a hammer and dreams as clean as snow. Your Grace, Lyanna said, I am not a ghost. Robert's breath left him like a man who had run too far. For a heartbeat, there was none of the court in him at all. Only the boy of the trident smelling damp reeds and horse sweat with a stag on his shield and her name in his mouth. Lya. The High Septon lifted a hand, reminding even kings that sanctuaries are not their halls. If this lady is who she declares, he said, if the betrothal first made stands, then the faith has cause. But it must be spoken whether the bond with the Lady Cersei be sundered. You married, your Grace, before gods and men. You consummated not the promise of youth, but a king's duty. No, Robert said, and the word shocked them all the more for how quietly he said it. I took a crown like a weight on my skull. I took a wife like a girding of armor. In both, I did not love what I took. I was promised to Lyanna Stark and never released from that promise in my heart or by the law that was made. The man who told me she was dead lied to me. He would have had me die too inside and call it duty. I can be a better king than that. I can be a just man. Cersei's chin lifted by the least degree. Justice takes more shape than a man's heart, she said, and the syllables were honed to a knife's edge. You break faith not only with me, but with my house. You called us to the city under banners of peace. Do you make truce with one hand and strike with the other? I do not strike you, Robert said, and for once he sounded tired instead of loud. I set aside what should never have been, and I will make such amends as a king can. But I will not live a lie because a lion wants a crown's velvet to line his den. Tywin glided his gaze over the altar. The king, his daughter, the Stark girl, the old man in velvets, as if he were measuring cloth. Ned thought of a mill where grain is poured and comes out fine and featureless. The High Septon's ring flashed as he made the sign. By the grace of the Seven, he pronounced, it is decreed. The marriage of Robert of House Baratheon to Cersei of House Lannister is annulled on account of pre-contract to Lyanna of House Stark, made and not dissolved. Let no man gainsay what the faith confirms by law and wit, save it be the Seven themselves. When the bells pealed this time, some wept, some smiled. Cersei did neither. She let the crown be lifted from her hair and the weight of it pass as if it had been a bowl filled with ashes. She turned without bowing. For a moment Jaime's hand lifted, half a gesture of a brother, half a treason of a knight. Then he stilled it on the hilt of a sword he could not draw here. They went like pale fire down the aisle, Lannister guards parting the press of small folk with silver butt caps, and Tywin followed them, leaving no more ripple than a ship leaves in its wake that closes again as if nothing had passed at all. Lyanna did not track them with her eyes. She had ridden roads where the wind knifed and the reeds whispered of ghosts, and she had learned that the thing before you mattered more than the thing behind. She met the king before the mother, and the mother's statue looked down with a painted smile that did not know men's furies or women's choices in dark places where the world demanded payment. The king extended his hand, and she took it, and their fingers interlaced with the grave formality of two banners being stitched along a heavy seam. Ned bowed his head and, for an instant, let himself breathe. They were wed with diamonds in the air that were merely dust motes caught in the sun, with a roar outside like surf because King's Landing is a city built on gossip and bread. When the doors were flung wide and the king raised the queen's hand, a sound went up that was not so different from a cheer for a tourney's champion, except that it did not dim. It chased them down the steps and over the cobbles. It climbed the hill to the Red Keep with them. It filled the vaulted corridors so that even the dragons in their death-sleep mosaics seemed to watch. Robert's laughter was a reckless thing cut loose and unshackled. He seized Eddard when they were out of the press and crushed him in an embrace that creaked mail. I told you I would make the world right when I had the tools, Ned. By the gods, look at her. Look at our girl. I'll have the North and the Stormlands sing the same song and drown all the sour bastards in it. Ned allowed himself a smile. Robert, don't break my ribs. Break your ribs? I'll break the realm if it needs breaking, Robert said, and to Ned's ear that was the first note of a storm, clear as a hunter's horn far away. But Robert turned to Lyanna then, and the storm was not for her. He was softer with her than Ned remembered him being with anything. In the years since the Trident he had grown a carapace against sorrow, wine, bawdy songs, loud hunting parties, and now that shell cracked and fell away like clay under rain. Do you remember the hawk I promised you? He asked her. Gray as cloud and faster than rain. We'll fly her over the Blackwater. I'll hang a lure with Tywin's face on it and watch her rend it. Lyanna's mouth curved without fully smiling. If the hawk is as loud as you are, she'll scare all the rabbits back into their holes. They moved like a storm's eye through court and celebration. Jon Arryn's face, weathered and kind, was thoughtful as always. He had been Robert's second father, and yet his mouth's firm line told Ned he measured even this joy for what it would cost. Stannis stood behind the dais, thin and stony. He bowed to the queen, and his eyes were tired, but no man could accuse him of failing his king. Renly, too handsome for his own good, laughed in a way that made courtiers curl around him like cats. Barristan Selmy's white head bent to Lyanna, as if he were swearing again what he had sworn a lifetime ago to a very different king. "I will protect you." Varys murmured, "A miracle for summer," as if he were not calculating how many ships a miracle might purchase. Peter Baelish smiled at Ned from across the hall, and then smiled at Lyanna, and then smiled at the spot where a shadow fell on the floor. That night, when the feast was done and the maids had shaken rushes clean and the moon had drawn a silver line along the hulls in the harbor, Ned found Lyanna on a balcony above the godswood within the Red Keep. They had planted a weirwood here long ago and killed it when a new god's house wanted the green space. Now the pool reflected the moon not as a thing of grace but as a coin. Lyanna rested her elbows on the stone and looked north, though there was no way to see the north from here, only to feel where it lay like a cord tied to the heart. "You came from the edge of the world," she said without turning, "and you left the gate open in winter." "Stannis keeps a tight gate," Ned said. "Not that gate," said Lyanna, her breath winged white in the chill that had crept in with evening. "I told you to close it." "I did what could be done, Lya." He stood beside her. The wind tasted of salt and onion and the iron tang of a city too big for its walls. He looked at her profile, at the fine nose and the stubborn mouth, at the line of her jaw that was their father's. She had lived. By what luck or will or mercy he would never understand. She had lived beneath fever and blood and the smell of crushed winter roses. He had pressed snow against her cheeks that were too hot. He had listened to her ramble about a baby she refused to name, and he had watched her sleep while outside 3 white-cloaked men died to keep that sleep unbroken. Life had crawled back to her with the desperation of a fox in a trap. He had carried them both from a tower full of ghosts across land that swallowed travelers and spit up their bones in spring. She turned her head and her eyes met his with an old command. "Promise me," she said. The words came back like a stone thrown at him from long ago. He caught them. "I have kept your boy safe, Lya." Her fingers tightened on the stone. The wind made their cloaks snap softly. "Say his name." "Jon," Ned said, though in a fever-snowed room she had said another. One he never let escape his mouth because names are doors and enemies have keys. "Jon Snow. He lives. He is at Winterfell. He thinks I am his father. He knows nothing else." Her eyes shone as if the moon were dissolved in them. She closed them. "Keep it so. You do not want Robert to know?" "He will think he is strong enough to forgive," she whispered. "And I do not know if he is. He will want to love what I love and it will scald him. He will say he can keep the boy safe, and the moment he speaks his name aloud, the world will begin to gather tinder. It is safer to be no one in the north than to be someone in King's Landing. We play at justice here. In Winterfell, the words are shorter and truer. Do not die. Caitlyn is kind until she is not," Lyanna said, not unkindly. "She is proud and she loves you. She will look at the boy and think I have wronged her. I have wronged everyone, maybe. If she is flint, strike her with patience until she chooses to be warm." "She has never been untrue to me," Ned said. It sounded childish in his own ears. Lyanna smiled a little. "You are a man and I am a wolf, and you still think the world is a board game where men place pieces and women are squares. I am queen now, Ned. I remember the snows in the gods' wood at Winterfell, and I remember the reeds whispering around a tower and how the sky looked when you came through the door with a sword red as a rose. I can be both." "Robert loves you," he said. "He loves an idea of me," Lyanna said. "Today I am close to it. Tomorrow perhaps less. It does not matter. We will make a real thing together anyway. The world is built on compromises." She looked north again. "But not on that one. Keep Jon in the snow with the wolves. Keep him and say nothing and let him grow." Ned looked at the pool until the coin of the moon broke on a breeze and reassembled. He had never loved anyone the way he loved his sister, but love does not change the price men must pay. As you command, he said, and the words were a joke and not a joke. When word reached Casterly Rock of what had been done, they said the sea grew still for a moment out of respect for the old lion's rage. Tywin broke nothing, overturned nothing, threw no goblets. He went to the solar where his father had wasted days with music and mistresses and held a quill as if it were a blade. He wrote letters, to the Iron Bank, to Mace Tyrell, to Paxter Redwine, to his brother in the Westerlands who commanded the Goldcloaks of Lannisport, to his daughter. To her he wrote without endearment. The first line was in the form of an instruction. Return at once. The second line was a question. Do you obey? He sealed it with the signet of his house, a lion rampant, and the wax cooled to a hard, pretty red. Cersei did not obey. She went to the sept in the night, when no one was there but dust and the last prayer of a woman long gone. She knelt because her mother used to kneel, clasped the rail where her crown had been lifted from her, and pressed her forehead to the wood. She did not pray, because the gods had never answered her, and she did not weep, because tears were woodworm that turned strong planks into sawdust. But she remembered the smell of Jaime's hair when they were children and shared a bed in summer when the heat drove maids from the room. And she remembered a boy with a hammer swinging at her father's gates. And she remembered the sound of bells tolling a wedding that cut her from a future she had worn like a pair of gloves she did not intend to take off. Jaime found her in the candlelight and sat beside her like a man who had set down his sword at last. Sister, he said. Brother, she said, and did not look at him. I am no one's queen. You were never anyone else's in truth. She tilted her head. There are so many truths. One of them is that I will not go back to the rock to have father parade me like a prize horse for Tyrells and Redwines to paw. He will not sell you cheaply. I am not for sale, she said, and at last she looked at him. Her eyes were green glass, cool and dangerous. If he insists, I will make him understand the price of forcing me. He smiled in that way that made people love him and hate him. He taught us well. But you cannot make the world what you want by wishing it so. Can't I? She leaned close, and he felt what he had always felt in her presence. The world narrowing to the space of a breath. He was a knight, and that was a joke too, in a place where vows are written with ink that dissolves when heat is applied. He kissed her, because some commands are beyond any king's power to annul. In the Red Keep, life reorganized itself around the new queen the way ants make new roads when their hill is kicked. Lyanna's voice carried in the small council chamber not as thunder but as good rain. She did not fill the room. She irrigated it. When Varys spoke of tithes and Pycelle of precedence, when Littlefinger proposed a tax that would make a man think he was in debt when he was not, when Stannis grunted at waste as if it were a personal slight, Lyanna asked quiet questions until their fine phrases lost their shine and revealed the metal underneath. I would see the city's cisterns cleaned, she said. The last quart we pulled from one was mud. If plague comes, pretty speeches won't lift the dead. Your Grace, Varys said. Sanitation is a noble aim everywhere save in the purses of those who must pay for it. The crown wastes coin on masks and disguises, Stannis said. The crown spends coin where it must, Varys said with a touch more steel than usual. The crown is in debt still from the sack, Littlefinger murmured. It is fortunate Lord Tywin. Lord Tywin lends at rates that would make a Braavosi blush, Stannis said. Robert grinned at that, though there was little to grin at. All right, he said. We'll do fewer foolish tourneys this year. We'll clean the cisterns, and we'll stop paying whores for the watch. I'll not hear of my gold put on short men for long nights. Your Grace, Lyanna said later when they walked beneath a pergola hung with ivy that put lace shadows on their faces. You hurt the same people you owe when you curse the levies. Be merry if you must, but remember the city keeps receipts even if you forget. I know it, Robert said, sobered. He had not been taught to write ledgers in Storm's End. He had been taught to endure a siege. We will put the realm to rights. I swear it. You make me want to be the man I am in my better stories. His hand found the small of her back as if it had known the way for years. He barely touched her, cautious with her the way men are with fine glass. If he had known her as a girl, he would have mishandled her like a battle standard. Now he moved around her as a man moves around a fire in cold weather, gratefully, carefully, knowing it can give and it can take. She learned him. She learned that his rage rose like summer squalls and passed just as fast if she did not meet it with lightning of her own. That his generosity was as real as his appetites. That his vices were not masks but habits built to keep grief from peering at him through cracks. Once, he came to her drunk and wanting, and she set a finger on his mouth. "No," she said. He stared at her as if she had shoved him. "I am your husband," he said. "You are my king," she said. "And a king should not go where he is not asked." It was a voic, like velvet that could abrade stone, and he recognized it as the voice of someone who had once fought for breath on a bed soaked with blood. He slept on the floor that night like a penitent, and in the morning he rose early and went to the yard and broke 3 lances against a quinton until his palm blistered. That evening he brought her the hawk, gray as cloud, yellow-eyed and dangerous. He held out his hand with a glove for her to feed the bird strips of liver. She smiled then, and it was like a new coin minted. The city had a queen and learned the taste of her. She went to the docks when a fire broke out and took the line of buckets from hand to hand until soot smeared her nose and made her look 10 years younger. She attended a sept for a widow whose husband had not returned from the riverlands to collect his pay in blood. She rode down to the mud gate and stood there while rain fell in sheets, watching a barge of barley unload for bakers whose flour had gone wormy in their bins. The small folk called her the Wolf Queen and meant it kindly. The court called her the Northern Queen and meant it not unkindly. She did not try to be loved. She tried to do the thing in front of her. When the raven came from the Iron Islands, wet and salt-stained, it brought scrawl rather than script and a smell of rot. The words were few. Men who write on spray-soaked parchment and mean to send it by raven do not write long. Balon Greyjoy called himself king in a hand like a hooked nail. He had burned Lannisport while Tywin's men slept and their harbor sang with the crackle of tar and cedar. The red wine fleet had been bottled in their own harbor by gales that blew as if the drowned god himself had taken up a horn and breathed upon the world. "Now there's a foe to fit," Robert said, and his laugh was a hammer. "Stannis, call the fleet. Ned, you will have the north on the roads to Moat Cailin and beyond. I'll take the Stormlords down the coast and see if salt tastes the same in my mouth as it did when I was a boy." Lyanna stood with them and listened to men talk about how men should die. "Do not split the fleet," she said. "Stannis will want to pursue raiding longships that dart where larger ships cannot go. Better to herd them, drive them into a cove and kill them there." Stannis nodded once. "The Queen understands the sea without knowing it." "I understand wolves and wind," Lyanna said. "They behave the same if no man commands them. Battle makes kingdoms and unmakes them." It made Robert again. It remade Eddard for the last time. On the decks of war galleys off Fair Isle, Stannis drove oars to splinters and masts to stumps, his ships moving with cold intent through blood-warm water while the Ironborn sang of drowning. Off a spit of rock that stabbed the sea like a knife, Victarion Greyjoy's warhorn howled and was answered by the thunder of a ship's ram taking a galley broadside. The sound went through men's ribs and made them think of being boys again with their ears pressed to their mothers' bellies. Davos Seaworth, Onion Knight now by the grace of a hungry castle and a hard man's gratitude, steered a ship where the currents thickened like stew. He saw the Queen once, years later, and she thanked him for bringing salt in the black months. But in those days they were all too busy living to imagine gratitude later. Robert fought in mail that clung like a second skin, the antlers on his helm glinting with spray, his warhammer opening men as easily as if their bones were doors. The deck went slick beneath him. He roared and laughed and bled from a crease across his hip he would not notice until 3 days later when Lyanna said with infuriating calm, "You are limping," and made him show her. She cleaned it herself, her hands steady, her face shut against the memory of a bed where bandages had filled the room with the sour smell of poultices and death. When Eddard crossed the causeways of the neck, the crannogmen came out of reeds like frogs turning human as they stepped onto land. Howland Reed embraced him with the stiffness of a man who does not touch often. "The bog eats iron men," he said, "but their fire floats. We will need rain." The gods obliged. Men died anyway. They always do. Pike's basalt stair ran red under Eddard's boots the morning he climbed it, the sea throwing spindrift that salted his mustache. He did not think of banners. He thought of a boy he had left in Winterfell with a direwolf pup sleeping on his feet. They broke the Greyjoys as you break a hand that has struck you too often, savagely and with fear in your mouth that it will strike again. Balon bent the knee on salt-slick stone and tasted the humiliation he would never forget. Theon Greyjoy stood with eyes too large in a face too small. He did not know yet that the world had narrowed to a shoreline he could never return to, that this day would put winter in his bones forever. Ned laid a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You are safe," he lied. In King's Landing they rang bells when the raven came with the words victory and submission and oath. Lyanna did not go to the sept this time. She went to the Tower of the Hand and stood with Jon Arryn looking over the city where the roofs glittered with rain. "You have done a hard thing," he said, as if talking about washing a wound. "It was the king's will," she said. "Kings are men who wake with moods," Jon Arryn said. "The realm is a patient that must be coaxed to drink medicine. Stannis is medicine. Robert is a story. You are something in between. Be careful." Lyanna's hand lay on the rail and he saw the scar there, a faint line across the palm where she had gripped a blade too tightly once long ago. "I am always careful," she lied. Cersei Lannister did obey at last, for obedience is a currency and she had plans for it. She returned to Casterly Rock and stood beneath the tapestries of 1,000 golden lions and let her father look at her as if she were an account book he could not make balance. He told her she would wed Willis Tyrell. He told her that in this manor House Lannister would knit to House Tyrell and make a fabric strong enough to stretch back over the country that had been yanked from his hands. She told him no. He told her yes. They stood in silence then, both intractable, the way cliffs stand and let sea cut them to new shapes. Jaime was sent to Riverrun to remind Hoster Tully of the king's justice, which meant little and everything. Tywin would not put his sword in the city for now. He would not give Robert the clean war he was built to win. Instead, Tywin did what he had always done best. He made other men's appetites serve his. Gold moved. Promises moved. A whisper began, a tiny thing at first. The new queen was not so unspotted as she seemed. Men are levers when their vulnerabilities are known. Littlefinger's hand was on one of those levers. Varys's hand was on another. The two men never touched, but sometimes their breaths stirred the same feather. The royal progress went north in the spring, because Robert wished to show his queen the snows she had told stories about, and because Jon Arryn suggested that letting men see a king and queen together was a cheap way to purchase peace. They went up the King's Road like a slow, loping caravan, with banners of gold and black and gray and white streaming, with knights who looked absurd when they dismounted in mud and courtiers who had never been outdoors long enough to discover that the world is wet and hard. Lyanna took to the road as if she had been born there, which she had. She rode every league instead of creaking in a litter, and when rain began she tilted her face into it and laughed. Robert watched her and remembered a boy who had thought life was easily done if you simply did it quickly. Winterfell rose from the forest like a remembered dream made stone. Steam curled from the hot pools, and ravens perched in the rookery marked their return with a racket that was more honest than any trumpet. The Godswood was a place of trees and silence, and the heart tree's face bled sap in slow tears that made Southerners uneasy and Northerners reverent. Lyanna dismounted there and stood with her hand on the bark. "Hello?" she said softly to the face and did not feel foolish at all. Catelyn Stark met them at the gate with her back straight and her mouth steady. She was not beautiful the way queens discussed among themselves, with jewels and laces and swans' necks. She was the other kind of beautiful, the kind that mothers are in firelight, that women are when they hand you bread with clean hands and words that do not waste themselves. She curtsied perfectly to the king and perfectly to the queen, and when she rose her eyes told Lyanna everything. "I am the lady of this keep. I have held it with my husband far away and wolves at the door. I will not be moved." Later in the stone tower that had been Catelyn's girlhood wedge against all things northern, they sat with bread and honey and cheese. Lyanna watched Catelyn's fingers pour wine and knew without being told that those fingers had dug splinters from Bran's thumb and wiped Sansa's tears and buttoned Arya into gowns she refused to stay in. "My lady," Lyanna said. She did not apologize. She had learned that apologies sometimes were stones one gave an enemy to throw back. "Your Grace," Catelyn said. She looked at Lyanna's face as if committing it to memory for a portrait she would paint later for no one to see. "The North is proud of you." "Thank you," Lyanna said. Arya burst in like a thunderclap and was brought up short by wolves and kings and queens. The child's hair was a tangle. Her knees were scabbed. She had a chip out of a tooth and a grin with too much future in it. "You have a sword?" she demanded of Lyanna. "I have two," Lyanna said gravely. "One for each hand." Arya's eyes went enormous. Sansa came in after, red hair in perfect braids like a river of copper, and performed a curtsy that could have hung in a window. Robb carried himself like a boy pretending to be a man and almost succeeding. Bran clambered onto a bench and then off and then on again. Rickon hid behind Catelyn's skirts and glared out with fox eyes. By the time Jon came, the room had filled with the polite noise of family that is not performed for courts and is therefore salvation. Lyanna's breath left her as if someone had struck her. He stood in the doorway with snow still melting on his shoulders, with a face more solemn than a boy's face should be, with eyes that were a winter lake. He bowed without flourishing because he did not know he was supposed to be grand. "Your Grace," he said to her. "Come here," she said in a voice she did not know she had. He came. She looked at him without touching him because sometimes touch is too much to bear. He smelled like leather and oil and straw, and for a heartbeat the room went away and there was only a fevered bed and a child slick as a fish placed on her belly and a knife floating in a bowl and the sound of a man crying who never cried. "Do you ride?" she asked him, because that is what you ask a boy in the North if you wish to tell him you approve. "Yes, my lady," he said, and he bit his lip after the words. "Your Grace." "What horse?" Robert asked, because he had stalked the doorway and could not bear to be left out of a room where something was happening. "Quince," Jon said. "He is ugly and very fast." Robert's laugh filled the chamber. "He is your father's son, then?" he said helplessly, and Lyanna's heart stepped on an invisible thorn. Ned stood not moving at all. Catelyn's gaze slid over Jon as over a piece of furniture that had always been in the room and always would be until it fell apart. They went to the yard the next morning and Lyanna took a spear because she remembered the joy of hitting a target dead square. Jon watched everything too closely, as if he were trying to memorize his way into belonging. When she put the spear into his hand, his clasp was sure. He did not linger over her fingers. He smelled of cold and iron. "Breathe," she told him. "In and then throw as you breathe out." He hit the shield not perfectly, but soundly enough to please them both. Robert watched Lyanna's hair fly when she threw and told Ned later, "We will fill this place with children, boys and girls and all in between. We will make the Winterfell corridor impassable for toys." He was drunk on hope again, as he had been when young, and Ned was glad and afraid in equal measure. When the raven came with Jon Arryn's last words, they were written in a hand that grew unsteady after 2 lines. The hand had taken ill 3 days past with a cough that shook him and phlegm that would not clear. Lisa wrote in a neat, cramped hand. The maesters say he was old. He breathed his last with a prayer on his lips. He requested that the king come at once, for he had words for him that he must hear from no mouth but his own. Robert pressed his fist into the letter until wax cracked. "Always it is the good ones," he said. "I cannot spare him." He looked at Ned in a way that made the future rearrange itself. "I'll not ask a thing of you that you can't give, old friend," he said, while asking everything. Lyanna watched the 2 men and thought of a rope stretched between 2 stones. 2 men could walk across it if they did not look down. They went south again because kingships drag you like nets drag fish. Lyanna kissed Catelyn's cheek before she left and Catelyn endured it like something that acknowledged a treaty. She kissed Arya's hair and Sansa's cheek and whispered something to Robb that made him stand straighter. She did not kiss Jon because if she had, the world would have seen and used it. She looked at him until looking hurt and then looked at the road. The small council that met them on their return was smaller by one, and the space Jon Arryn had occupied felt like an empty chair set at a table that the family refuses to remove. The letters he had left stacked beside his bed told a story of sums and shipments and lineages. Lyanna scanned one with a column of names under City Watch overtime and saw the way Littlefinger's neat calculation made ghosts look like men. Stannis read another aloud without expression. It dealt with coal for the smithies and a coin stream that disappeared into a private purse like a river into limestone. If Lyanna had not been queen, she would have been a steward. She liked the way numbers told on men without malice. Lisa writes that Jon died calling my name, Robert said. I do not like the taste of that. He had always loved who raised him more than who sired him. That was the good in him. It made everything worse now. A maester's draft can kill without a knife, Stannis said. A wife's tears can too, Varys murmured. A husband the size of a stable, Littlefinger said with a smile, usually dies of anything he likes. Send for Maester Pycelle, Robert said. He is friend to Lannister gold and to old men dying. Pycelle came creaking with scrolls and stories. He had known Aerys, he reminded them. He had known Steffon Baratheon. He had known too many. He pontificated until Lyanna felt the room fill with dust. In the dust there were tracks. She followed them with a mind used to finding deer in woods where the snow had disguised everything. Who inherits the Vale? She asked when Pycelle paused to draw breath. Why, the boy, of course, Pycelle said mildly. Sweet Robin, a frail boy. He will need care. He rolled the word around his mouth as if savoring it. Lisa has a fondness for home, Littlefinger said. There was laughter in his voice with nothing amusing in it. Varys's lashes lowered, then rose. I have heard it said that Lady Lisa is devoted to the health of her son and the security of her house, which means she will close her doors and let wolves and lions batter at them, Stannis said. It means she will be as useful as a locked chest whose key is in Braavos. A hand is a thing we have need of. Robert looked at Ned. It was as inevitable as winter. I will not say please, he said, because you know it's beneath me. Come play nursemaid to a realm of brats with me. I have children, Ned said, almost in surprise. I have a son who, he stopped. Lyanna's gaze touched him and held. You have me? Robert said, clapping him heavy across the shoulders. I never minded being second son when you were first in sense. We'll hunt boars and hunt liars and see which falls first. You'll come. You always come. It was done as things are done in a court, by the stubborn momentum of expectation. Catelyn's letter came in reply and was a thorn wrapped in velvet. He held it and the words pricked him and he bled duty. Lyanna read it and loved Catelyn for the pain that made the words as neat as if she had written them in peace. I have asked too much, Lyanna told Ned that night in a room where the windows looked down on the black mirror of the sea. You kept your promise, he said. So keep yours. Her hand found his. Keep him safe. He nodded. Always. When the wheel is set in motion, men who fling themselves upon its spokes are broken. Tywin did not fling himself anywhere. He waited with a patience made of lead and let the street do his dirty work. King's Landing rioted on a day in high summer when the heat pressed on heads like a smith's palm. The meat turned foul faster than buyers could carry it home. A baker's cart lost a wheel and tipped its loaves into the filth, and a woman who had been cheated last market day took it as a sign sent by the stranger. They tore at one another with hands and the guards answered with clubs, and for a little while everyone forgot who they were supposed to serve. Lyanna went into the street without a crown and took a pail from a girl whose arms shook and carried water to a boy with his head cracked, and the sight of her in the dust eased the fever of fraction. She stood on a cart and spoke until her voice broke. You will not die of thirst in a city by the sea, she said. You will not starve in a city whose granaries are full. And it was mostly true and mattered anyway. She ordered 3 warehouses opened and the grain there measured out under the eyes of priests who could be relied upon to remember what they had seen. She made enemies among men who had been counting on high prices and friends among men who had been counting on ash. When the last bucket was emptied and the last house shuddered against the night's heat, Sandor Clegane followed her back to the Red Keep with a badly concealed admiration in his scowl. He was a dog that bit not because he liked blood, but because he had been taught that biting was how you lived. "You'll get yourself killed," he said. "Will you let them?" she asked without breaking stride. He snorted. "I've killed with worse reasons." Jaime watched her pass across a courtyard with the kind of attention that is half envy. He wore white and carried himself as if the weight of vows were the easiest thing he'd ever borne. He stopped her with a bow that had been perfect since he was 13. "Your Grace," he said. "You are determined to be loved." "I am determined to be obeyed," she said, and the smile she gave him had teeth. His own smile came, helpless as a swallow. It was Jaime who led the White Swords when men tried to shove a dagger into the Queen's side on a quiet autumn evening, while she crossed a gallery whose windows were 7 arches of late fire. The man came from behind a pillar where shadows collect dust. He moved like someone's cousin at a feast and then like a killer. Jaime saw the glint, threw himself, and took the blade on his vambrace. Blood spilled in a beautiful line across the mosaic of Nymeria's ships. The hound's SWO. RD came out with a noise like a man spitting. The assassin's head did not entirely separate from his neck, but the intention was there. Robert roared like a stag caught in a trap and smashed the assassin's friend against a pillar so hard the man left an outline on the stone. Eddard came running from the other end of the gallery with his sword out, breathing as if he had run from the beyond of time. Lyanna stood very still until the noise stopped, and then her knees did something they hadn't done for years. Jaime offered her his arm. She took it because sometimes men are furniture that keeps you from falling, regardless of their sins. "Who?" Robert demanded, foot on a dead man's chest as if it were a raft. Littlefinger came too quickly and leaned too near. Varys came more slowly and said very little. Pycelle said the words footpad and malcontent in a way that could have meant anything. Stannis looked at the corpse, then at the Queen, then at the corpse. "Steel from a Lannisport armory," he said. "The Maker's Mark is there beside the edge." "Half the world has steel from Lannisport," Littlefinger said, smiling. "The other half has debt." Tywin read in the letter what Robert wanted him to read: that men from his lands had been caught with knives near the Queen. He wrote back with perfect courtesy that Lannisport was a city and cities have men with knives. He enclosed a purse heavy enough to make the messenger's mount favor one shoulder. He waited. He knew what waited is. It was in that iron space between men's gestures and their consequences that Lyanna told Robert the truth he had not asked for. He came to her with wine that was better than he usually drank when he was in a mood to drown himself, and he said, because he had run out of more complicated things, "I want a son." He set it into the fire because it was easier to confess to flames than to a face. "I want a son who is ours. He will smell like piss and milk, and he will ruin my shirts. He will know nothing of war for as long as I can keep it from him." She sat with her feet tucked up beneath her like the girl she no longer was. "You may have a son," she said, and the words were both balm and blade. "You may have a dozen if the gods have a sense of humor. But hear me." She did not look at him. She looked at the fire. "There is a boy in the north. He is not your blood. He is mine. If the world knows whose he is, it will use him as a hook to start a war. It is not a hook I will offer." Robert froze like a man who has been swimming hard in cold water and suddenly remembers he can drown. He looked at her slowly. "Whose?" She held his gaze then, "Because you owe the man you married several kinds of truth, even if one of them will kill him." "Rhaegar's," she said. "He was not a monster." Robert's face moved through expressions the way weather moves across a range. Rage came first because rage is faster than sorrow. He opened his mouth and the old words he had spoken 1,000 times about Targaryens began to pour, and she raised a hand, just that. He swallowed them and nearly choked on them. "Did he take you?" he said, and that was the boy question. "I went," she said. He shut his eyes. She did not flinch. "I did not go to break the world. I went because the world was already broken for me. And then it broke for everyone else too, because men do not forgive women who choose for themselves. But the boy, he did not choose anything. He breathes. That is his only sin. Robert put his head in his hands and sat that way until the fire made his shadow huge and the night thinned. When he finally spoke, he sounded younger than his voice ever did. "You will ask me not to kill him," he said. "I will," she said. "You will ask me to love him." "No," she said, and it was very gentle. "I will ask you to leave him alone. It is a greater kindness." He stood and crossed to the window where the sea sang in the dark like something washing a body. He had always been a man of decisions made quickly. This one took longer. He did not turn when he made it. "I am better than my hate," he said. "I am not much better, Lyanna, but I am a little." He can keep his name and his snow if that is safest. "If anyone touches him, I will nail their hands in the square." She let out a breath that tasted like the end of winter. "Thank you." He turned then, and there were tears in his eyes. He had not wept for anything since the trident. "Do not thank me. I wanted to be better than my stories. Now I will be a worse one. The king who raises another man's son in a lie. The king who let a Targaryen live. The king who married a woman who loved another man. You will be the king who kept a child alive," she said. "That is the only story that matters to me." He came and dropped to his knees at her feet and put his head in her lap like a weary dog. She put a hand in his hair and stroked it the way you soothe creatures that don't know how to be soothed. He slept there at last. She sat until the fire burned low. News traveled over the narrow sea that autumn like birds blown off course. In Pentos, a fat magister fed a bony prince and his pale sister with greasy hands and fatter promises. Viserys Targaryen dreamed of a throne and did not understand the cost of chairs. Daenerys watched the sea as if the sea would tell her who she was. She was no longer a child by the measures of men who marry girls. She was a child by any measure that mattered to mercy. Illyrio took her hand and placed it in that of a horse lord with a braid down his back and an army that moved like a storm. The horse lord looked at her as if she were an object and grunted. Viserys smiled with all his teeth as if the smile could be hammers and ladders. "Your king grows complacent," Illyrio told Varys in a letter. "The Lannisters seethe and count. The wolf girl is a queen and the small folk like her too well. If one cannot move the rock, one moves the water around it." Varys touched the parchment and pursed his lips. "The realm will have peace," he told the spider he kept in a tiny gilt cage. "Or it will have something that looks like it from far away." Winter sent an envoy, a wind that knifed and mornings that tasted of iron. Lyanna grew round with child and more beautiful in a way that made courtiers nervous. The north loved her for the way she wore her strength. The south loved her for the way she held her tongue when men preened. She gave birth on a night of hard frost with the stars very near and very sharp, and she swore afterward that the cry of her son cracked the cold. He had black hair that refused to lie flat and a stubbornly set mouth that was neither father's nor mother's but entirely his own. They named him Stefan for the father Robert had lost in a storm. Robert wept in front of everyone and did not seem to mind. He held the child as if he had never held anything before without wanting to break it. Lyanna slept and dreamed of a tower in the reeds where a boy breathed, and woke with milk wetting her shift and a star so bright it felt like a sign. Cersei stood in a balcony of Casterly Rock and watched the sea grind itself against the cliffs as if it were trying to eat the land. Willis Tyrell wrote civil letters she did not answer. Marjorie was still a little girl who would someday be dangerous. Tywin watched the ravens drop with his ledger open. He erased a number with sand and wrote a new one. He made a marriage for his brother's son that would taste of vinegar and honey. He invited the faith to dinner. He waited. The boy Stefan grew. He reached for his mother's hair and his father's beard and for the hammer on the wall above the hearth. He stood early, walked late, laughed without provocation, and slept with one hand fisted as if holding a thing that could not be taken from him. Lyanna let Arya hold him once with a look that made nursemaids knit their hands to keep from snatching the prince back. Sansa sang to him songs that turned him peaceful. When Ned held him, he thought of Robb as a baby and remembered being afraid of that smallness that is so easily broken and so effortlessly unbreakable. Stannis found something in the ledgers one winter afternoon that made his mouth go white. He took the book to Robert with a kind of fury that has no sound. "The crown owes," he said. "It owes like a bad horse trader. It owes the Lannisters more than is safe for the king. It owes the Tyrells what will make them think they own us. It owes the faith, which means we owe everyone who buys piety to cover sin. We will stop this." Robert rubbed his temples. He had learned to read numbers the way he read men's faces in the yard, but numbers were less likely to show fear when they lied. "We stop," he said. "We stop buying bread with wine." He cut feasts by half and heard courtiers call him miser behind his back. He cut the ornaments from his own armor and heard men snicker that the king wore used steel. He laughed with them at feasts and then went to bed sober enough to resent them properly. In the midst of it, a whisper turned, thin as thread and persistent as mold. "The prince in the north, the one with no name, the one who looks like frost." A sell sail in White Harbor with a scar that glistened like snail trail told a tale in an alehouse of a boy with the king's face and not the king's blood. The tale moved south in the mouth of a peddler and then in the letter of a rival. When it reached Casterly Rock, Cersei smiled an inch. When it reached King's Landing, Varys hid it in the bottom of a drawer. It reached Robert one night not by letter but by a man too brave for his own sake. Jory Castle brought a message from Winterfell and stood in the king's chamber with his boots on his feet and his pride on his face. Ned wrote, without flourish, that rumors sprouted like mushrooms and that he cut them. He did not write that Jon had knocked Theon Greyjoy on his arse in the yard with a movement that looked like dancing. He did not write that Catelyn had turned away one evening with her eyes full. He did not write that the boy's wolf had grown to the size of a small pony and would not leave him. He wrote, "All is well. Send us nothing but patience." Robert read the letter and then put it in the fire and watched it curl and crumple. "I have never been patient," he said. "Learn," Lyanna said. He did his best. He went hunting more often, as if killing made waiting easier. He did not drink as much as he might have, as if leaving the edges sharp would keep him honest. On a morning when the cold climbed men's legs like a cat, he went out with only a handful of guards to stalk a boar in the king's wood. The boar turned on them with a sound like a bellows. The king held and struck and bled, and came home pale but laughing, and ordered mulled wine, and slept like the dead. When he woke he was fevered, and the wound had gone sour, and men in the corridors moved like ghosts, and the queen went very quiet in a way that made the air itself wait. He did not die. Lyanna sat beside him and fed him broth and told him stories she had not told even herself, and he clawed his way back as if the world were a cliff and he had too much to do at the top to fall. When he stood again, he kissed her in the middle of the floor of their chamber with no attendants present, and they laughed because sometimes you must. The spring after, a red comet hung over the city for a week. Men looked up and saw crowns falling, blood spilling, ships burning, children born. Lyanna looked up and saw a streak of iron in the heavens and thought only that it would be a good time for planting, because such light made men wake early. Daenerys Targaryen crossed a desert whose sands turned men's tongues to leather and learned the taste of power and of its cost. She learned the value of a name the way a blacksmith learns the weight of a hammer. Viserys died of gold. She learned to love a man who did not know he had learned to love her. She learned to lose him. In a fire that smelled of horsehair and old sorrow, she learned that sometimes you must step into flame to become the thing you were supposed to be. Word of such learning crossed the sea on ships whose captains did not believe it themselves and told it as a fancy after the dice had been thrown. When Tywin finally moved, he did not move toward King's Landing. He moved toward the Riverlands, which had done nothing to anyone but sit in the middle of the realm and absorb armies like a sponge absorbs spill. Lannister levies crossed the Golden Tooth, and the smoke from their cookfires made a haze that could be seen from the God's Wood at Riverrun. Hoster Tully coughed himself to exhaustion, telling anyone who would listen that he had done with war. War does not care what men have done with it. Robert stood on the ramparts of the Red Keep and looked west. Lyanna came and leaned on the parapet beside him. "He wants you to march to him," she said. "He wants me to send Ned," Robert said. "He wants the realm to tear itself into red ribbons while he pulls on the ends. He wants little bites until we are bleeding and dizzy. Stannis says we should sit." Stannis would sit through a fire if someone told him it was law. "What do you want?" Lyanna asked. He sighed and set his big hands on the stone. "I want to take a hammer and knock his teeth out through the back of his skull. I want a boy who doesn't smell like horse shit to sit on my knee and smear gravy on my beard. I want to be loved by the people I ought to be loved by and feared by the ones who deserve it." He shrugged. "I will send a letter and a warning and a small force and see if he blinks. If he does not, we will have peace until we don't." The letter went, carried by a man who had written messages for 3 kings and survived them all. It warned Tywin that the king's patience was not infinite and that the king's hammer was not a toy. Tywin read it and wrote a reply that was at once gracious and empty. He withdrew. He advanced. He counted. The realm waited like a field watching a dark line of storm on the horizon and wondering if the wind would break north or south. On a morning cool as steel, Lyanna took Steffan to the Godswood that remained the Red Keep's poor cousin of Winterfell's. The boy reached chubby hands for the water and laughed when it licked his fingers, and she laughed with him. She did not see Peter Baelish in the shade watching them with a look a man gives a game he nearly understands. She did not see Varys watch Peter and think that in a world of lions and stags and wolves, it is the little creatures who live longest if they make careful use of darkness. Arya sent a note from Winterfell to the Queen written in ink that had blotted when she'd grown impatient waiting for it to dry. "I have a new wooden sword father says I cannot take to bed. Ido anyway. When I am older, I will have a steel one and no one will stop me." Lyanna showed the letter to Robert and he hooted and said, "She's you." And Lyanna thought that though the world was a board with pieces and squares, some pieces insisted on moving as they pleased and upset games worth kingdoms. Years took on a shape. Steffan learned to walk without falling. Robb learned to raise his voice to men grown twice his size and be obeyed. Sansa grew tall as a reed and learned to sing in a way that made rooms quiet. Arya learned how to run with boys and beat them when she could. Bran learned trees. Jon learned patience and fury. He learned the sword the way some men learn the flute. He spoke little and watched much. Catelyn watched him watch and sometimes hated herself for what she saw in him that had nothing to do with him at all. Lyanna and Robert had another child, a girl they named Liara after the mother they had loved differently and lost the same. Robert wept less openly this time and had to leave the room when he first held his daughter because his hands were too large and his heart was too large and he did not know where to put such largeness. When the winter finally came in truth, it came with gray mornings and nights that swallowed breath. The realm had not bled itself white by then. It owed coin and grudges and kindnesses and pain. It had a king who had learned to count and a queen who knew how to hold, and that combination is rarer than many realize. Tywin still counted. Cersei still planned. Stannis still endured. Renly still charmed. Varys still whispered. Littlefinger still smiled. The east still stirred. But the Blackwater froze along the edges and the people of King's Landing pulled their cloaks tight. And in the Red Keep, Lyanna set her son on the sill of a window and showed him how frost makes art when no one commands it. He pressed his hand to the pane and left a print that gathered crystals along its edges and grew into a fern made of winter. "If you tell the frost your name, it will not melt you," he told her with the solemn nonsense of a child. She kissed his crown and breathed in the smell of him that was milk and ash and the iron tang of the sea. "Keep your names," she said, and it was a prayer and a command and a wry smile all at once. Wind rattled the shutters like bones, the bells tolled in the city below, and somewhere beyond the walls where the road turns north, a boy with a direwolf leaned into the snow and did not know yet which of the stories being written would carry him. In the Queen's chamber, the fire caught and brightened, and the shadows of antlers and winter roses stretched long on the stone.